In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills and wide open fields, there lived a woman named Clara Thompson. Clara was in her mid-40s, with warm brown eyes that always seemed to sparkle when she talked about her farm animals. Her home wasn't just an ordinary house, it was a sanctuary for all kinds of creatures, from playful goats and clucking chickens to waddling ducks, and even a stubborn but lovable donkey named Jasper. Each animal had its own personality, and Clara treated them like family. She spent her days feeding them, cleaning their pens, and making sure they were happy and healthy. Clara's farm wasn't huge or fancy, but it was full of life. The goats would often climb on top of bales of hay, looking down at her as if they ruled the place. The chickens pecked around freely, laying eggs in the oddest spots, sometimes even inside old boots Clara left outside. And then there was Jasper, the donkey, who loved attention but hated being told what to do. If you tried to lead him somewhere he didn't want to go, he'd plant his hooves firmly on the ground and refuse to budge until you gave up. Despite his antics, Jasper was Clara's favorite, and she couldn't imagine her farm without him. But Clara's peaceful life wasn't entirely free of drama. Like many neighborhoods, hers had a homeowners association, HOA, which handled things like community events, property rules, and general upkeep. While most members were friendly and easygoing, one person stood out: Karen. Everyone called her HOA Karen because of how strict and controlling she could be. Karen was known for nitpicking over tiny details, like whether someone's mailbox was painted the right shade of blue, or if their garden gnomes violated some obscure rule no one else cared about. She was also famous for hosting extravagant parties, where she made sure everyone knew how much money she'd spent on decorations and catering. Despite their differences, Clara tried to stay out of Karen's way. She didn't want any trouble, especially since her focus was on taking care of her animals. But deep down, she found Karen's behavior exhausting. The woman seemed to thrive on drama, always finding new ways to stir the pot in the neighborhood. Still, Clara figured it was best to keep her distance and let Karen do her thing while she focused on hers. One sunny afternoon, Clara was tending to her animals as usual. She filled buckets with fresh water, scattered feed for the chickens, and checked on each pen to make sure everything was in order. As she approached the goat enclosure, something felt off. Buttercup, her prized goat, was nowhere to be seen. At first, Clara thought maybe Buttercup had wandered off through a gap in the fence. It wouldn't be the first time one of the goats decided to explore beyond the boundaries of the farm. But as Clara looked closer, panic began to creep in. Not only was Buttercup missing, but 2 of her chickens and 3 ducks were gone too. Even Jasper, her loyal donkey, was nowhere to be found. Clara's heart sank. This wasn't just a coincidence. It felt deliberate. Someone had taken her animals, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. Who would steal farm animals? And why? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what might have happened. She walked around the property, searching for clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken fences or open gates. Whoever had done this had been careful not to leave a trace. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the farm, Clara decided to ask her neighbors if they'd noticed anything unusual. First, she visited Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who lived down the road. He was sitting on his porch sipping lemonade and watching the sunset. When Clara explained what had happened, Mr. Peterson frowned thoughtfully. "Well, now that you mention it," he said slowly, "I did see Karen's truck parked near your property late last night. I thought it was odd because she doesn't usually come out this way unless there's a meeting." Clara's stomach tightened. Karen? Could she really be behind this? It seemed far-fetched, but then again, Karen had always been unpredictable. Determined to get answers, Clara knocked on a few more doors. Another neighbor mentioned hearing strange noises coming from Karen's backyard earlier that morning. "It sounded like animals," the neighbor said, "like bleating or something." The more Clara heard, the more suspicious she became. Karen was planning a big party that weekend, a rustic barnyard-themed barbecue, and suddenly, the timing seemed too convenient. Why would someone steal farm animals unless they needed them for something specific? Clara's suspicions grew stronger, and she knew she had to confront Karen. That evening, as she sat alone in her kitchen staring at the empty stalls where her animals should have been, Clara couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Her farm wasn't just a hobby. It was her passion, her purpose. Those animals depended on her, and now they were gone. But giving up wasn't an option. She resolved to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a wild and unexpected journey, one that would test her patience, her courage, and her faith in humanity. The next morning, Clara woke up with a heavy heart but a determined mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was somehow involved in the disappearance of her animals. While it seemed hard to believe that someone would go so far as to steal farm animals just for a party, Clara knew Karen well enough to understand how obsessed she could get about appearances. If Karen wanted her rustic barnyard-themed barbecue to be perfect, she might not hesitate to take drastic measures, even if it meant crossing ethical lines. Clara decided to pay Karen a visit, hoping to confront her directly and maybe even catch her off guard. As she drove toward Karen's house, she rehearsed what she would say in her head. She didn't want to sound accusatory right away. Instead, she planned to act calm and collected, asking casually if Karen had seen anything unusual near her property. But deep down, Clara was nervous. What if Karen denied everything, or worse, what if she admitted it? When Clara arrived at Karen's immaculate suburban home, she couldn't help but notice how different it was from her own farm. Everything about Karen's place screamed perfection: the perfectly trimmed hedges, the shiny brass numbers on the front door, and the pristine white picket fence that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was almost ironic, considering how messy Karen's personality could be. Karen answered the door wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a glass of orange juice. She glanced at Clara with mild surprise before plastered on her trademark fake smile. "Oh, hi, Clara," she said in a tone that dripped with insincerity. "What brings you here?" Clara forced herself to remain polite. "Hi, Karen, sorry to bother you, but I've had a bit of an issue at my farm. Some of my animals are missing: Buttercup, a few chickens, some ducks, and even Jasper. Have you noticed anything strange lately? Maybe heard any noises or seen anyone suspicious around?" Karen tilted her head slightly, pretending to think. Then her lips curled into a smug grin. "Missing something, huh? Well, animals wander all the time. Maybe you should invest in better fencing or keep a closer eye on them." Her words were dismissive, almost mocking, and they stung more than Clara expected. Clara clenched her fists tightly behind her back to hide her frustration. "I know my animals, Karen. They wouldn't just wander off like that. And I've been told your truck was spotted near my property last night." Karen's expression flickered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "My truck? Really? That's ridiculous. I was probably just driving through. You know how these roads connect everywhere." She laughed lightly, as if trying to brush off the accusation. "Besides, why would I care about your goats or chickens? Sounds like you're jumping to conclusions." Her attitude only fueled Clara's determination. She realized then that confronting Karen face to face wasn't going to get her anywhere. If Karen really did have the animals, she wasn't going to admit it willingly. Clara needed proof, and fast. That evening, after returning home, Clara sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the empty stalls where her animals used to be. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and helplessness. Those animals weren't just livestock, they were part of her life. Buttercup's playful bleats, the soft cooing of the ducks, and Jasper's stubborn yet endearing presence. They were all gone, replaced by silence. The thought of Karen using them as props for her party made Clara's blood boil. She couldn't let this slide. Determined to gather evidence, Clara turned to her teenage nephew Tyler, who lived nearby. Tyler was tech-savvy and always eager to help his aunt with anything involving gadgets. When Clara explained the situation, Tyler immediately agreed to assist. Together, they came up with a plan to catch Karen red-handed. Tyler suggested using a hidden camera disguised as a rock. He showed Clara how it worked, a small device that could record continuously for hours without being detected. They decided to plant it along the edge of Karen's backyard, positioning it carefully so it could capture both the area where the animals might be kept and any activity around them. To avoid raising suspicion, Clara waited until the following afternoon. When Karen was out running errands, she approached Karen's house under the pretense of returning a gardening tool she'd borrowed weeks ago. With the camera tucked safely into her bag, Clara walked casually toward the backyard, making sure no one was watching. She placed the rock near a cluster of bushes close to the fence, ensuring it had a clear view of the space. Over the next few days, Clara monitored the footage closely. At first, there wasn't much to see, just birds fluttering past and occasional glimpses of Karen watering her plants. But on the third day, the camera revealed something shocking. Late in the evening, Karen emerged from her garage dragging a cart filled with hay bales. Behind her trailed several familiar figures. Buttercup tied loosely to the cart, looking visibly distressed. The chickens and ducks crammed into tiny wire cages labeled Petting Zoo. And poor Jasper, tethered to a post, his ears drooping in defeat. Clara watched in disbelief as the video continued. In subsequent clips, Karen could be seen arranging the animals around her backyard like decorations. She draped colorful ribbons around Buttercup's neck and tied balloons to Jasper's harness. The chickens and ducks remained trapped in their cramped cages, unable to move freely. Watching the footage broke Clara's heart. These animals weren't props. They were living beings who deserved care and respect, not exploitation for the sake of a party theme. But things took an even darker turn when Clara overheard audio snippets from the camera. Karen was talking to a group of friends, bragging about how clever she'd been. "No one will ever guess where I got these animals," Karen said with a laugh. "They add such authenticity to the party. Who needs rented decorations when you can borrow the real thing?" One of her friends asked if Clara knew about it, and Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Please, she won't figure it out, and even if she does, good luck proving it." Clara paused the video, her hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just theft, it was cruelty. Karen had taken her animals knowing full well how much they meant to her, and now she was using them to impress her guests. Worse still, Karen had no intention of returning them. Clara knew she couldn't handle this alone anymore. She needed help, and not just from the local authorities. After doing some research, Clara discovered that stealing livestock could fall under federal jurisdiction depending on certain factors, such as whether the animals were transported across state lines or used for commercial purposes. Armed with this information, she contacted the FBI, explaining the situation in detail and providing the damning footage as evidence. To her relief, the agents took her seriously and promised to investigate further. As Clara waited anxiously for the FBI to act, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. For days, she had felt powerless, but now she finally had a chance to fight back. She imagined the look on Karen's face when the truth came out, the smugness replaced by shock and embarrassment. More importantly, she pictured her animals safe and sound, back where they belonged. Little did Karen know, her lavish party was about to become the talk of the town, not for its extravagant decorations or fancy food, but for the chaos that would unfold when justice finally arrived. With the hidden camera footage securely in hand, Clara felt a surge of determination. She had spent days watching the heartbreaking scenes of her animals being used as props, and now she was ready to take action. But this wasn't just about getting her animals back. It was about holding Karen accountable for her actions. Clara knew that proving theft and animal cruelty wouldn't be easy, but she was prepared to fight every step of the way. Clara's first move was to reach out to the local authorities. She visited the sheriff's office early one morning, clutching a USB drive containing the video evidence. The officer who greeted her listened patiently as Clara explained the situation. At first, he seemed sympathetic, nodding along as she described how Karen had stolen her animals and was using them for her party. But when it came time to act, the officer hesitated. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "this is complicated. These are livestock, not pets, and jurisdiction over livestock theft can vary depending on where they were taken and what happened afterward. Plus, without clear proof of intent or financial gain, We may not have grounds to intervene." Clara's heart sank. She had hoped the police would immediately step in, but instead she was met with bureaucratic roadblocks. Still, she refused to give up. She asked if there was anything else she could do, any other agency she could contact. The officer suggested reaching out to animal control or even consulting a lawyer, but Clara knew those options wouldn't bring her the swift justice she needed. Her animals were suffering right now, and every moment counted. That evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table with Tyler, her tech-savvy nephew. Together, they reviewed the footage again, frame by frame, looking for anything they might have missed. As they watched, Clara noticed something new, a license plate visible in the background of one shot. It belonged to a trailer hitched to Karen's truck, parked near the garage. This detail gave Clara an idea. If she could prove that Karen had transported the animals across county lines, or even state lines, that could elevate the case to federal jurisdiction. Tyler agreed to help dig deeper. Using online databases and public records, he traced the registration of the trailer. To their surprise, it turned out the trailer had been rented from a company located 2 counties over. This meant Karen had indeed moved the animals beyond local boundaries, strengthening Clara's argument that federal laws might apply. Armed with this new information, Clara decided to escalate the matter further. She contacted the FBI. The call to the FBI was nerve-wracking. Clara wasn't sure what to expect. Would they take her seriously? Would they dismiss her as just another upset homeowner? But to her relief, the agent on the other end of the line listened carefully. When Clara mentioned the interstate transport of stolen livestock, the tone of the conversation shifted. The agent explained that such cases fell under federal statutes related to livestock theft and commerce, which the FBI could investigate. Clara sent over the video footage and all the additional evidence she had gathered, including screenshots of Karen's social media posts teasing the live entertainment at her upcoming party. Over the next few days, Clara worked closely with the FBI agents assigned to her case. They instructed her to avoid confronting Karen directly, as doing so might tip her off and jeopardize the investigation. Instead, they devised a plan to gather more concrete evidence during Karen's big party. Undercover agents would infiltrate the event disguised as caterers, servers, and guests, while Clara herself would attend as a curious neighbor. This way, they could document everything firsthand and ensure they had irrefutable proof before making any arrests. As the day of the party approached, Clara felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She spent hours preparing, rehearsing what she would say if anyone asked why she'd come. She wore her simplest outfit, a faded denim shirt and jeans, and carried a basket of homemade cookies as a cover story. "Just thought I'd bring something sweet," she practiced saying aloud, trying to sound casual. On the morning of the party, Clara woke up early, her stomach churning with nerves. She drove to Karen's house, parking a safe distance away so as not to draw attention. As she walked toward the backyard, she saw rows of tables decorated with checkered cloths, mason jars filled with wildflowers, and banners proclaiming, "Welcome to the Barnyard Bash." Guests mingled happily, laughing and sipping drinks, completely unaware of the chaos brewing beneath the surface. And then she saw them, her animals. Buttercup stood tethered to a wooden post near the food station, wearing a ridiculous pink bow around her neck. A sign above her read, "Fresh milk bar, try your hand at milking." Nearby, the chickens and ducks were crammed into tiny cages labeled petting zoo, while Jasper pulled a cart adorned with balloons, looking utterly miserable. Clara's heart ached seeing them like this, reduced to mere decorations for Karen's vanity project. She forced herself to stay calm, mingling with the crowd and pretending to enjoy the festivities. All the while, she kept an eye out for the undercover agents. One by one, they slipped into position, blending seamlessly with the guests. A server carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres nodded subtly at Clara, signaling that everything was going according to plan. Another agent, posing as a photographer, snapped pictures of the animals and their surroundings. Karen, oblivious to the operation unfolding around her, strutted through the party like a queen surveying her kingdom. She stopped frequently to pose, for photos, draping an arm over Buttercup or striking playful poses with Jasper's cart. Each time she laughed and gestured dramatically, Clara's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about stealing animals anymore. It was about exploiting them, treating them as disposable objects rather than living beings. Finally, the moment arrived. Clara gave the signal to the lead agent, who had been waiting discreetly near the entrance. Within minutes, several unmarked cars pulled up outside Karen's house. Agents poured into the backyard, badges flashing as they announced their presence. Guests froze in confusion, unsure what was happening. Karen, however, turned pale, her confident demeanor crumbling instantly. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "This is private property. You can't just barge in here." One of the agents stepped forward, reading her rights aloud. "You're under arrest for theft, animal cruelty, and obstruction of justice," he said firmly. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Karen protested loudly, claiming she was the victim of harassment, Clara watched silently. Agents began confiscating evidence, documents, receipts, and most importantly, the animals. Buttercup was gently untied and led to a waiting van while the chickens and ducks were carefully transferred to portable crates. Jasper, though still stubborn as ever, seemed to perk up slightly once he realized he was leaving Karen's yard behind. When the last animal was safely loaded, Clara approached Jasper, kneeling down to stroke his soft nose. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "We're going home." The partygoers stared in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. Some looked horrified, others amused, and a few even applauded quietly, clearly aware of Karen's reputation. By the time the agents finished their work, Karen was being escorted to a squad car, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. As she passed Clara, she spat, "You'll regret this, mark my words." Clara simply smiled. "No, Karen," she replied softly. "I think you'll regret yours." As the FBI vehicles drove away, taking both Karen and the animals with them, Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. The weight that had settled on her shoulders for days began to lift. Justice was within reach, and her animals were safe. But this was only the beginning. The fallout from Karen's actions would ripple through the community in ways no one could have predicted. And Clara knew that whatever happened next, she had done the right thing. The day of Karen's rustic barnyard-themed barbecue dawned bright and sunny, with a crisp breeze rustling through the trees. Clara woke up early, her nerves buzzing like static electricity. She had spent the past few days working closely with the FBI, rehearsing every detail of their plan to ensure nothing went wrong. Today was the culmination of all her efforts, the moment when justice would finally catch up to Karen. Clara dressed in her simplest outfit, faded jeans, a plain denim shirt, and sturdy boots. She wanted to blend in as much as possible, to avoid drawing attention to herself. In one hand, she carried a basket of homemade cookies, a prop designed to make her look like just another neighbor dropping by for the party. As she drove toward Karen's house, her mind raced with questions. Would Karen suspect anything? Would the operation go smoothly? Most importantly, would she get her animals back unharmed? When Clara arrived, she parked her car a block away, ensuring it wouldn't stand out among the luxury vehicles lining Karen's driveway. She took a deep breath before stepping out, reminding herself to stay calm and focused. Walking up to the backyard, she saw that Karen had spared no expense in transforming her property into a so-called barnyard paradise. Tables were adorned with red and white checkered cloths, mason jars filled with wildflowers served as centerpieces, and string lights twinkled above, creating a festive atmosphere. Guests mingled happily, laughing and sipping drinks while country music played softly in the background. But amidst the charm and cheer, something darker loomed. Clara's eyes scanned the area until they landed on her stolen animals. Buttercup, her prized goat, stood tethered near a makeshift milking station, wearing a ridiculous pink bow around her neck. A sign above her read, "Fresh milk bar, try your hand at milking." Nearby, the chickens and ducks were crammed into tiny wire cages labeled petting zoo, looking miserable and disoriented. And then there was Jasper, her loyal donkey, pulling a cart decorated with balloons and ribbons. His ears drooped, and his usually spirited demeanor seemed crushed under the weight of his captivity. Clara's heart ached at the sight. These animals weren't props. They were living creatures who deserved care and respect. Seeing them used as mere decorations for Karen's vanity project made her blood boil, but she forced herself to remain composed, reminding herself why she was here. This wasn't the time for emotion, it was the time for action. She joined the crowd, pretending to admire the setup. "Oh, what a clever idea," she said brightly to a nearby guest, gesturing toward Buttercup. "Using real animals must have been such a hassle, though." The guest chuckled. "I know, right? I heard Karen practically had to beg someone to lend them to her. She's always going all out for these parties." Clara smiled politely, but felt a pang of anger. If only they knew the truth, that Karen hadn't borrowed the animals at all. She had stolen them. Clara spotted undercover FBI agents moving discreetly through the crowd. One posed as a caterer, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, while another pretended to be a photographer, snapping pictures of the animals and their surroundings. Everything was falling into place. As the hours passed, Karen strutted around the party like a peacock showing off its feathers. She stopped frequently to pose for photos, draping an arm over Buttercup or striking playful poses with Jasper's cart. Each time she laughed and gestured dramatically, Clara's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about stealing animals anymore. It was about exploiting them, treating them as disposable objects rather than living beings. Finally, the moment arrived. Clara gave the signal to the lead agent who had been waiting near the entrance. Within minutes, several unmarked cars pulled up outside Karen's house. Agents poured into the backyard, badges flashing as they announced their presence. The cheerful chatter of guests came to an abrupt halt, replaced by stunned silence. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "This is private property. You can't just barge in here." One of the agents stepped forward, reading her rights aloud. "You're under arrest for theft, animal cruelty, and obstruction of justice," he said firmly. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Karen's face turned pale, her confident demeanor crumbling instantly. "This is absurd," she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at Clara. "She set me up. This is harassment." Clara remained silent, watching as agents began confiscating evidence. They collected documents, receipts, and other materials that could prove Karen's guilt. Meanwhile, a team of animal control officers worked quickly to free the stolen animals. Buttercup was gently untied and led to a waiting van, where veterinarians stood ready to examine her. The chickens and ducks were carefully transferred to portable crates lined with fresh bedding, while Jasper, though still stubborn as ever, seemed to perk up slightly once he realized he was leaving Karen's yard behind. When the last animal was safely loaded, Clara approached Jasper, kneeling down to stroke his soft nose. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "It's okay, buddy. We're going home." Jasper nuzzled her hand affectionately, as if thanking her for rescuing him. The partygoers stared in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. Some looked horrified, others amused, and a few even applauded quietly, clearly aware of Karen's reputation. By the time the agents finished their work, Karen was being escorted to a squad car, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. As she passed, "Clara," she spat. "You'll regret this, mark my words." Clara simply smiled. "No, Karen," she replied softly. "I think you'll regret yours." With Karen in custody and the animals safe, the backyard descended into chaos. Guests began whispering among themselves, piecing together what had happened. Many expressed sympathy for Clara, admitting they had always found Karen's behavior overbearing and self-centered. Others marveled at how far Karen had gone to host the perfect party, shaking their heads in disbelief. As the FBI vehicles drove away, taking both Karen and the animals with them, Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. The weight that had settled on her shoulders for days began to lift. Justice was within reach and her animals were safe. But this was only the beginning. The fallout from Karen's actions would ripple through the community in ways no one could have predicted. That evening, Clara returned to her farm exhausted but relieved. Her animals were reunited with their familiar surroundings, and despite their ordeal, they seemed to settle back into their routines quickly. Buttercup bleated happily as Clara fed her fresh hay, while the chickens clucked contentedly, scratching at the dirt. Even Jasper, though still grumpy about being told what to do, trotted alongside Clara as she checked each pen. As she sat on her porch later that night, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara reflected on everything that had happened. She had faced fear, frustration, and uncertainty, but she had also discovered strength she didn't know she had. More than anything, she felt grateful for her animals, for her supportive nephew Tyler, and for the brave individuals at the FBI who had helped her bring Karen to justice. Little did Clara realize, however, that this incident would change more than just her own life. News of Karen's arrest spread quickly through the small town, sparking conversations about accountability, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. For Clara, this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, resilience, and a renewed sense of purpose. In the days following Karen's arrest, the small town buzzed with gossip and speculation. The story of how Clara had exposed Karen's crimes and brought in the FBI to raid her backyard party spread like wildfire. Local newspapers ran headlines like FBI raids HOA chairwoman's party over stolen farm animals, and from barnyard bash to crime scene, a tale of greed and justice. Neighbors who had once feared or tolerated Karen's overbearing behavior now found themselves discussing her downfall with a mix of shock and satisfaction. Clara, however, tried to stay out of the spotlight. She didn't want attention. She just wanted her animals back and her life to return to normal. But as word of her bravery spread, people began reaching out to her. Not just neighbors, but strangers from nearby towns who admired what she had done. Some sent messages of support. Others dropped off donations for her farm, and a few even volunteered their time to help repair fences and clean pens. It was overwhelming at first, but Clara soon realized that this newfound community spirit could be a blessing. Her little farm, which had always been a sanctuary for animals, was now becoming something more, a symbol of resilience and justice. The legal process against Karen moved swiftly. With video evidence, witness testimonies, and documentation of interstate transport, the case against her was strong. Karen faced multiple charges, including theft, animal cruelty, and obstruction of justice. During her court hearings, she attempted to defend herself, claiming ignorance and blaming others for her actions. "I thought the animals were rented," she argued dramatically during one session. "How was I supposed to know they were stolen?" But her excuses fell flat. The judge wasn't swayed by her theatrics, especially after hearing emotional statements from Clara and the veterinarians who examined the animals. One vet described how Jasper's hooves showed signs of neglect due to being tied up for extended periods, while another noted the stress-induced feather loss in the chickens. These details painted a clear picture of neglect and exploitation, leaving no room for doubt about Karen's guilt. Ultimately, Karen was convicted on all counts. While she avoided jail time due to plea deals and mitigating factors, she received hefty fines and mandatory community service working with animal shelters, a punishment many saw as fitting. Additionally, she was permanently banned from holding any leadership positions within the HOA. For someone who thrived on control and status, this loss of power hit hard. Rumors circulated that Karen planned to move to another state, vowing never to host another party again. For Clara, the aftermath of the ordeal brought both challenges and opportunities. The strain of confronting Karen and navigating the legal system had taken its toll, leaving her physically and emotionally drained. But it also reinforced her belief in standing up for what's right, no matter how daunting the challenge. She decided to channel her energy into expanding her farm into a nonprofit educational center, where children could learn about animal welfare, responsible pet ownership, and the importance of treating all living beings with kindness. With the help of volunteers and donors, Clara transformed parts of her property into interactive spaces. She built a small classroom, set up informational displays about different farm animals, and created guided tours so visitors could see firsthand how a sanctuary operates. Schools began scheduling field trips, and families started visiting on weekends, eager to meet Buttercup, Jasper, and the rest of the crew. Clara loved sharing stories about each animal, teaching kids not only about their unique personalities but also about the responsibilities that come with caring for them. Jasper, of course, became the star attraction. His stubborn yet lovable nature made him a favorite among visitors, particularly young children who giggled when he refused to budge during feeding times. Clara often joked that Jasper had become the unofficial mascot of the farm, his bray echoing across the fields as if announcing to the world that justice had prevailed. As months passed, the memory of Karen's dramatic fall faded, replaced by a renewed sense of unity within the neighborhood. People who had once kept to themselves now came together for community events hosted at Clara's farm. There were potlucks, fundraisers, and even an annual barnyard day, where locals celebrated rural traditions with games, music, and, naturally, plenty of farm animals. These gatherings reminded everyone of the strength and compassion that could emerge when people stood up for one another, and for what was right. Karen's departure from the HOA paved the way for new leadership, and Clara was surprised to find herself nominated for the position. At first she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to take on such a responsibility. But after much consideration and encouragement from Tyler and her neighbors, she accepted. Under her guidance, the HOA shifted its focus toward fostering kindness and cooperation rather than enforcing trivial rules. Monthly meetings became less about nitpicking and more about finding ways to improve the community, whether through beautification projects, charity drives, or simply organizing fun activities. For residents through it all, Clara remained humble. She credited her success not to herself but to the animals who had inspired her journey and the people who had supported her along the way. "This farm isn't mine," she often said during speeches or interviews. "It belongs to everyone who believes in treating animals and each other with respect." One sunny afternoon, as Clara sat on her porch watching Buttercup graze in the distance and Jasper trot lazily around the yard, she reflected on everything that had happened. The road had been long and difficult, filled with moments of fear, frustration, and uncertainty. But it had also taught her invaluable lessons about courage, perseverance, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. She thought back to the day Karen's party unraveled. The chaos, the disbelief, the relief of finally rescuing her animals. It felt surreal now, almost like a scene from a movie. Yet every detail remained vivid in her mind, serving as a reminder of how far she had come. Her quiet life on Sunny Acres had been disrupted in ways she never imagined, but it had also grown richer and more meaningful because of it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues over the fields, Clara smiled to herself. Life on the farm was peaceful again, but it was a different kind of peace, one born from knowing she had fought for what mattered most. And though Jasper occasionally gave her trouble during feeding times, he still nuzzled her hand affectionately, reminding her that sometimes justice comes with 4 legs and a bray.